Hello, Leo risings. I'm going to talk about 2025 for Leo risings. As with all my videos, this video talking about Leo risings is going to use your whole sign. If you don't know about different house systems, basically it means if you're a Leo rising, your whole first house will be Leo, your whole second house will be Virgo, so on and so forth in zodiacal order. I get a lot of comments saying, I'm a Leo rising, but my houses don't line up with your Leo rising video, and that is because you're using a different house system. I have another video called How to See Your House in Whole Signs. I use whole signs. I use a lot of timing techniques that require whole signs, such as annual perfections. It's super cool for talking about transits, so check it out. This video is going to focus specifically on 2025 for Leo risings. If you are not a Leo rising, go find your rising sign video. I'm not sure that I'm going to do all 12 signs just because I don't get views from all 12 rising signs and I have limited time and resources to make these videos. But yeah, if you don't see yours, you can leave a comment. And I'll make one because I'm a generator and I need to be invited to do things sometimes. Okay, Leo rising this year is fire in so many ways. This year is so much about changing who you are through rapid acceleration of things. And the first part of this year, and this is true for everybody, but the first part of this year, this 2025 is just really front loaded. We get a lot of the action in the first half of the year. And then the second half of the year, we have eclipses, we have some retrogrades, a couple Mercury retrogrades, but it's just really not quite as jam-packed. It's going to be a little bit of taking a breath, regrouping, and then we're stepping back from the edge because 2025 is really a glimpse into the future with all of the outer planet transits that happen. So it's like we peer over the edge into the future, we see what is maybe going to be happening. I think we're going to be seeing these big shifts, like geopolitically, but we'll also be feeling them personally. So when we check in, actually, skip that part. Okay, the big themes that are going to be happening this year. The overarching headline is that all the outer planets pretty much change signs. So that is a big deal because the outer planets are cultural planets. They stay in signs for more than half a decade. So they really color time periods of our lives and then also in the world, cultural movements. So them all changing signs in the same year is okay. Oh, like, I don't even know the last time that happened, hundreds of years ago, maybe thousands of years ago. I don't know. All their cycles have to line up in a really specific way for that to happen. That is absolutely the capital B big headline. We also have a Mars retrograde that we start the year with, a Venus retrograde in Mars's sign, Mercury retrogrades in fire signs, although two of the three dip back into water signs. We have the eclipse cycle of Libra and Aries having its last eclipse, and the nodes shifting, and we get into the meat of the eclipse cycle of Pisces and Virgo. So those are the big headlines. Where that shows up for Leo risings, right? Because we've got all of this fire activation. Those are your identity houses. Those are your blossoming houses. Those are your expansive houses. So of course, I am talking about your first house, Leo, where we are having a Mars retrograde right now, a little bit tense. We'll have a Mercury retrograde later in July and August. I am talking certainly about your ninth house in Aries, which has already been activated for the past couple years with some very potent Aries solar eclipses. We'll have one more this year, but we will also have a Venus retrograde that stations in Aries and a Mercury retrograde that stations in Aries. They'll both go back into Pisces, but they're very much involved in Aries. And this year has a lot of emphasis, especially in the beginning, on your ninth house, which is really about kind of your principles and how you practice what you preach and how you live out the spontaneous and adventurous exuberance of your life force. If you are lucky enough to be a Leo rising with an Aries sun, meaning that the sun is the ruler of your chart and it is in its sign of exaltation and Aries, and also in the house of its planetary joy in the ninth house, you're very lucky then. And this will be a really big year. And then finally, we will also have a Mercury retrograde in Sagittarius in your fifth house of joyfulness and discovery and sex and playfulness and pleasure. So Mercury is reconsidering how to bring some of this passion back into life if you've been stumbling a little bit and having a harder time. We have Pluto now fully in your seventh house of relationships, where it will be for the next 20 years, really transforming at a granular level the way that you experience relationships, what you project into them, what they bring out in you, how you show up and relate to the other standing before you, how you see them and how they see you. It's not like a bomb gets dropped every day for the next 20 years. These are slow, long transits. Their periods of intensity will be timed by when Pluto is hitting your descendant, when it's opposite your ascendant. So that will depend on the degree of Leo rising that you have, as well as any natal placements that you might have in Aquarius or in Leo or Scorpio or Taurus, because it will be making hard aspects to those. We will have Neptune and Saturn additionally moving into your ninth house. So out of that sticky, chaotic, boundaryless, indebted mess of the eighth, numinous and wonderful, but can be a little sticky. Hopefully, it's a little bit more organized after Saturn has been through that space. Hopefully, you can own a little bit more of your stuff or recognize what is your partner's and doesn't actually belong to you. They will both move into Aries, Neptune on March 30th and Saturn on May 24th. And so beginning another 3 years of a Saturn-Neptune co-presence, which means they're in the same sign, so they're blendy, but now in the space of the ninth house. So this begins a mini epoch for getting your mind both blown and restructured, right? So much is happening in the ninth house and how you explore the world and how you integrate new information in the information that you are interested in, and how you go out and seek that, and how that really changes the belief structure of your life. So that is a very big deal. We also have Uranus leaving your 10th house. Yay! You are almost done with that. Hopefully, it's been liberating in some beautiful ways, but I also know some really tough transits that have been a part of that for people, as Uranus is a double-edged sword. It sets you free by destroying the structures, which also means the expectations, the formulas that we had for how life was going to go. And this has been your 10th house. So in the past 6 years, almost 7 years since Uranus entered Taurus in May of 2018, who you are in a public facing way in the 10th house will have radically changed. And now it gets to go back to being a little bit more stable. You get to once again crown that spot with Venus and establish the serenity that wants to reign supreme in your 10th house. Goodbye, Uranus. Uranus will move into Gemini on July 7th. Uranus will retrograde back into Taurus on November 7th for a little bit, and then in 2026 make that final ingress into Gemini. In Gemini, Uranus is making sure you have much more interesting friends. So Uranus brings that kind of countercultural movement, that destabilizing force to your sense of friends and allies. This can be a time of instability in who you are associating with. But with so much change happening in your ninth house over the next few years, this year and the next few years, right? Who you find yourself akin to in belief system or the way you want to take action on the things that you care about is likely to change anyway. So that will be very interesting. There's lots of new ideas that are destabilizing how you have thought of the social structure and really for Leo risings, how to be an individual within whatever social structure you're in. So those are the broad arching overviews. We also have Jupiter leaving your house of friends and entering Cancer, your 12th house this summer. This I imagine to be a supportive transit if it does pull you inward. So if you have time to spend some time in a 12th housey way, deep in the emotions and intimacy and connecting with home and family and nursing any wounds that might exist in that area of your life, then support will come from unexpected places with Jupiter's year-long transit through Cancer. Okay. I'm going to pull up a chart and do a little bit more of the nitty-gritty. But as always, if you want to work with me and work with your individual chart, you can book readings through my website. I have like all size of readings and would love to work with you on a one-on-one basis to check out your chart for the year. Okay. So here's where we start out the year. We have Mars retrograde in your first house at the very kind of end of it. So obviously your ascendant might be anywhere, but we have Mars at the very beginning of Leo about to retrograde back out of it. As part of that process, Mars is opposing Pluto, and the crux of that is really about how we are held and received by the people watching us, whether we are seen or known by the people who are trying to see us. And when we feel like what we're trying to do is having either consequences that we did not intend, or we just have no idea how the consequences of our actions are having as big of an impact or as small of an impact as they are. We have this existential crisis, this identity crisis, and that's very much this Mars opposition for Leo risings is this identity crisis. Like, why is what I'm trying to do not working? It's that moment. There's a lyric in a Death Cab song. The song is You Are a Tourist. When you find yourself the villain in the story you have written, it's plain to see sometimes the best intentions are in need of redemption. And that really is the vibe of this, of Mars and Leo, gung-ho, going forward with life has somehow become a villain and needs to go back and check where it was getting in its own way. And so shortly after that, we will have Mars retrograding back into Cancer, back into your 12th house. And it is going to be in your 12th house from January 6th until April 17th. So we spend really the first 4.5 months with Saturn in the 12th. And, Saturn with Mars in the 12th. Mars rules your ninth house as well as your fourth house. So this is very cloistered. This is very withdrawn in this space, processing deep psychological stuff, processing any ways that we might be sabotaging ourselves through not really admitting the way that we truly feel about things. Mars will station direct on February 24th and begin moving forward. But as I said, it won't be back into Leo until April 17th. And once it's back into Leo, it is going to again run straight into an opposition with Pluto. So this opposition that we're starting out the year with is the second of three oppositions. The final one won't happen until the end of April. And it's only on May 1st that Mars will clear the shadow of its retrograde and be on to new territory in Leo. But we won't get Mars completely out of the sign of its retrograde until June 17th when it enters Virgo, which will be its first new sign in 9.5 months. It went into Cancer in early September and has been either in Cancer and Leo from September of 2024 until June of 2025. This is really a potent time to be working on your relationship with yourself. We also have at the very beginning of the year, Venus entering Pisces. This is a really sweet transit. And one of my favorite things about 2025 is that we get Venus spending 2 full months in Pisces. They're not going to be consecutive months. She's going to spend a month in Pisces, 2 months. No, a month in Aries, a month in Pisces, a month in Aries as part of her retrograde cycle. But we get 2 separate months of Venus in the sign of her exaltation. So she goes in on January 2nd to start out the new year. This is getting presents. This is getting windfalls of other people's money, but really having the opportunity for really soulful, intimate relations and really like leaning into the numinousness of that and really soaking in with Venus and Neptune, soaking in these last months of the fantasy nature of Neptune in Pisces. On January 15th, we have the Sun-Mars opposition, which will take place at 26 degrees of Capricorn and Cancer. This is the midpoint in the retrograde. This is the highest amount of tension between what we're trying to do and how we are trying to do it. So between the Sun and Mars and them having to renegotiate so that they can get on the same page, because otherwise we are burning out and not accomplishing what we want to accomplish. At the end of January, the nodes that are at the very end, because the nodes move backwards, of Libra and Aries will move into Pisces and Virgo. So we will have the South node moving through Virgo and the North node moving through Pisces. The North node moving through Pisces is really this opportunity to let go and trust and find connection and communion within your deep relationships. The South Node in Virgo is about, right, tearing down the walls that you have built against love, which in Virgo looks like the need for control, the need for perfection in order to feel safe and stable in our lives. And so this process is a little bit more pushing you over, pushing you into the deep end of Pisces potentially, if you've gotten a little bit too stringent in the Virgo area of your life. These will be activated when we have eclipses that will happen in March and September. On January 30th, Uranus will station direct at 23 degrees and 15 arc minutes. So again, I mean, it's basically at the same degree as that when we start the year. Uranus stations direct and moves forward again on its march through some of the last degrees of Taurus. Part of the Venus retrogrades, and an interesting role that Venus plays this year is we talk about Mercury as the psychopomp, which is the guide of souls to different areas of the world, different areas of the chart. And Venus really plays that role this year because she conjoins all of the planets right before they step out into their new signs. And so as part of her retrograde, she is going to be in a conjunction with Neptune and the North Node And then she retrogrades back and moves with Saturn and moves with Saturn as Saturn is about to cross the threshold into Aries. So we get the first of three conjunctions with Neptune and Venus on February 1st. On February 3rd, Venus enters Aries. So by this point, she is already in the shadow of her retrograde. She will enter Aries. And then on February 4th, we get Jupiter stationing direct at 11 degrees of Gemini, moving forward again. And then on February 14th, on Valentine's Day, we have Mercury moving forward into dreamy Pisces. Not a bad time. We've got the emphasis from benefic, but Venus is in Aries, so she's getting itchy. She's getting dissatisfied with something. She wants to go exploring in those ninth house ways. Now, remember, still at this point, we have Mars retrograde in Cancer in your 12th house in the sign of its fall. So we have about the most disempowered, inaccessible Mars that we could possibly have. And Mars is ruling all this stuff happening in Aries. The things in our 12th house we get blindsided by them. And one way to get blindsided by Mars in the 12th is just to not be using Mars, to not be actively making decisions in our lives, to not know what we want, or to know what we want and to not take action, to be wallowing in a sense of helplessness, waiting for someone to do something for us. And that is the way that the story could be building here for how things are going to break down in Aries, for how we thought our life was going to go is going to break down, and we're going to have to spend all of this Aries energy reconfiguring that aspect because Mars is working that. On February 23rd, Mars stations direct at 17 degrees of Cancer. So now Mars is direct, but really around the station points, we can get some pretty intense Mars retrograde vibes, especially in Cancer. So just look out for that around the end of February. On March 1st, Venus is going to station retrograde at 10 degrees, almost 11 degrees of Aries. So she's going to be up here at 11 degrees of Aries, stationing in retrograde, and begin working backwards. She pauses. Now, if you think back to February of 2017, February, March of 2017, that was the last time Venus was retrograde in Aries, and she would have stationed at around 13 degrees of Aries and retrograded back. So if you think back to that time in your life and what was happening, you might see a reemergence of some of those themes. March 3rd, Mercury is going to enter Aries. So now we've got Mercury also in this vibe. It shakes off some of the water of Pisces, where Mercury is very dreamy, very creative, but not very action-oriented. Now, Mercury in Aries is going to, and really Mercury in any of the fire signs tends to put its foot in its mouth because we are talking faster than we are thinking. Mercury in Leo. It's also in the shadow of its retrograde at this point. So we're watching that happen. On March 14th, we will have a lunar eclipse in the sign of Virgo. So this is our first Virgo eclipse. It happens at 23 degrees of Virgo, almost 24 degrees of Virgo. And that is going to be checking the second house area of your life, which has to do with your resources, but also your values and how you stay grounded in your life by those things. And so that is a moment when we're checking in about something that's really going on. And the way that the second house is related to the ninth, right? They are in tension with each other around the areas of values because the ninth house is our beliefs and the second house is put your money where your mouth is. And if those are out of alignment, which I imagine in some respect they might be, just given the astrology, then there's a moment for a check-in there. Nearly simultaneously, the next day, Mercury is going to station retrograde at 9 degrees of Aries. So we had Venus at almost 11, 10, almost 11. Mercury at 9 degrees. We're really getting this concentration right at the end of that first decan of Aries. And so then Mercury is going to follow suit and retrograde back with Venus. Then we will have a kind of joint cazimi day where the sun conjoins Venus on March 22nd for the heart of her retrograde, and then the sun will conjoin Mercury on March 24th for the heart of its retrograde. And these are really moments of figuring out, okay, what's at the heart? What is the message? What am I supposed to gain from this? I may not be able to take action on it yet, but I get the core message right around those days. And that's going to be midway between eclipses. So those should be really potent. This would be a great time for an astrology reading. Doesn't have to be with me, but it could be. It's a great time because in between eclipses, you can just go so deep. And during retrogrades, when you're already reflective and focusing inward, you can go so deeply into things. And so you can get a lot out of it. On March 27th, we get Venus moving back into Pisces, immediately conjoining Neptune, right? So now we're in the dream soup, the love soup for all the relationships that will begin or rekindle during Venus retrograde. No shame. This is going to be the like juicy, lovely part or the like falling apart part. Hard to tell. Neptune can go either way. On March 29th, we will have a solar eclipse that happens at 9 degrees of Aries. So this is our third thing that happens right around 9, 10 degrees of Aries. This is our final Aries solar eclipse. This is this final new beginning, refreshing those ideas that kind of steer your life. And then at the same time, Mercury will retrograde back into Pisces, and Neptune on March 30th will ingress into Aries. If that seemed like a ton going on in March, you are absolutely right. March is hands down the craziest astrological month of 2025, just in terms of all of these things happening right on top of each other. Take a breath. That was the first quarter. That was a lot. This is what I said about 2025 being front loaded. Quarter two. Quarter 2 and 3 are really about these outer planet shifts. We had quarter 2 start with Neptune moving into Aries. In April, what we do is the kind of the Pisces half of the Venus and Mercury retrogrades. So Venus is going to conjoin the North Node in Pisces again. She is going to conjoin Saturn really for 2 exact hits, but she never quite gets out of orb of that conjunction. So this whole second half is Venus really leaning in and making deep commitments with Saturn, right? When we have Venus plus Saturn, we are making vows. We are making unbreakable vows. We are making soul vows in Pisces. And so that's really what she's doing to post Cazimi, knowing what she really cares about and really galvanizing herself to make that happen. Mercury will station direct on April 7th, and Venus will station direct on April 12th. So they will both be moving forward. Mercury moves forward from 26 degrees, Venus moves forward from 24 degrees. So these retrogrades are really kind of twins of each other with those personal planets. As I said before, Mars will move into Leo. So Mars will be back into your first house April 17th. You should be feeling a little bit better, at least having a little bit more energy running into that existential moment again on April 26th. Mars will oppose Pluto again, and so we'll be working through that. On April 30th, Venus is going to re-enter Aries. And on May 1st, Mars will clear the shadow of its retrograde. So will really get this deeper breath. Pluto stations retrograde on May 4th at almost 4 degrees of Aquarius. So that's as far into Aquarius as Pluto will get, but it's not going to retrograde back out. So we are firmly in Pluto and Aquarius land. And then on May 24th, Saturn will leave Pisces for Aries and begin this almost conjunction with Neptune that won't complete. They get within a degree. We'll feel it over the summer, but it's not going to complete until 2026. On June 5th, we get Venus into Taurus. Thank goodness. Now we've got Venus out of the signs of her retrograde in your 10th house. Things are stabilizing. This is what I'm saying. And then June 9th, Jupiter goes into Cancer, into your 12th house, right? In some ways, that's tough, but this is really the time to get the support and do the mental health work. Jupiter doesn't become a malefic just because it's in the 12th house, but if you are not combing those questions, if you're not leaning into them, then the 12th house can be the place of addiction, and we've got Jupiter, the planet of abundance, in a water sign. It's very, watch your alcohol intake. Because if you are not tending to the deep psychological scars of the 12th house in a more conscious way, then the transit will happen unconsciously. And so that'll just be a piece of it. It probably won't, unless it's aspecting something terrible in your chart. It's probably not going to be too terrible, but it's Jupiter's in there noticing what is unattended to. On June 15th, we have Jupiter square Saturn. And this is really interesting because we've had 3 of these squares so far. The first 2 happened in Gemini and Pisces, right? The second one was, here's the chart for December 31st of 2024. But they just completed an exact square on Christmas Eve, December 24th of 2024. By the time we get to June, they are squaring each other again, but this time it is from Aries. That's what I have to say about that. On June 17th, Mars will enter Virgo. And again, this is the first time Mars has been out of the signs of its retrograde since September of 2024. So we can really move forward then. Yep. Quarter 3, we are going to wrap up the outer planets moving. So we get Neptune stationing retrograde on the 4th of July at 2 degrees of Aries. So that's as deep as Neptune's getting into Aries, and it's going to start retrograding back and will actually retrograde back into Pisces by the fall. On July 7th, Uranus will move out of Taurus and into Gemini, right? Beginning a destabilization of who you think is on your team, who are your alliances, the ideas that you interact with on a regular basis. It's going to change it up. If you are one of the amazing Leo risings that is all over social media because your life is, then this is relating to your audience in a new way, getting a new audience, changing that, which might even be like because it's related to technology and it's going to be trining Pluto, how people see you, how you're seen, might even be like a new platform of some kind, changing things up. Saturn will station retrograde in the middle of July at 1.5 degrees of Aries. So that's as far as Saturn gets. Yeah. And then mid-July, Mercury is going to station retrograde in Leo. So that's going to be in your first house again, right? How you are seen, how you show up in the world, how much of yourself you share being part of this Mercury retrograde in Leo. The Mercury retrograde in Leo is likely to be the most significant of the 3 Mercury retrogrades because it is happening in an angular house in your rising sign. It will station direct on August 11th at 4 degrees of Leo. So you get that nice little band between 15 and 4 degrees of Leo. On September 1st, Saturn is going to retrograde back into Pisces. So we had Saturn in Aries for the whole summer. This is like hot old man summer. And it'll be back in Pisces for the rest of the fall, starting in September. September 5th, Uranus is going to station retrograde at 1.5 degrees of Gemini and start moving backwards. And 2 days after that, we are back into eclipse season and we get a lunar eclipse at 15 degrees of Pisces. So, right back in that eighth house, opening up those themes, helping you sort out what is yours and what belongs to other people, what trauma is yours, what trauma is theirs, how you are manipulating people or being manipulated by people. Those are all eighth house topics to sort through and try and create some boundaries if things are not working out very well there. On September 21st, so on the fall equinox, we will have an eclipse. This is our only solar eclipse in the Pisces and Virgo eclipse cycle, which is crazy. They are all lunar eclipses except for this one, but this one happens at 29 degrees of Virgo. It's going to be down there. I'm thinking of this as the kind of woulda, shoulda, coulda eclipse. This eclipse is almost like it's a beginning that is doomed in some way. Correct me if you think I'm wrong about this, but it happens at 29 degrees at the anaretic degree, all the way at the end of the whole Virgo process. And it happens opposite Saturn. Saturn will be at 28 degrees of Pisces at that point. And having a new moon opposite Saturn is like the stuff that you begin then is not, it's not beginning. It is being blocked by Saturn. I was induced to have my first baby during a Cancer new moon opposite Saturn. And then I was in labor for 4.5 days. Yeah, maybe I have a little bit of stuff around new moons opposite Saturn, but it's just funky. Don't do manifesting stuff, which is not a great idea to do it on eclipses anyway, but this one in particular is just gnarly. Okay, and then that brings us into quarter four, and there really is not a tremendous amount of stuff going on in quarter four. We have Pluto stationing direct at 1 degree, at 1.5 degrees of Aquarius. So now it's moving forward again. We have Neptune retrograding back into Aries on October 22nd. So now of the Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus, they are all back in the signs that they started out the year in. So they are finishing some stuff almost. Yeah, Uranus is retrograde, and then it will be back in Taurus on November 7th. Then they'll all be back in. On November 9th, Mercury is going to station retrograde at 6 degrees of Sagittarius. This will be our third Mercury retrograde of the year from Sag into Scorpio. This is really a kind of like pulling inward one. So we end the year on a little bit more of an introverted note, having done so much accelerated change through the course of this year. Saturn will station direct on November 27th at 25 degrees of Pisces, which is interesting because that is the degree that Venus stationed direct as well. And so this is Saturn going back and remembering that vow that Venus made at the end of her retrograde, at remembering those values and that faith moving forward. And then Mercury will station direct at 20 degrees of Scorpio on November 29th. Neptune stations direct at 29 degrees of Pisces on December 10th, and that's how we close the year. By then, Mars will have moved all the way through, and Mars will finish the year with Venus and the Sun approaching a triple conjunction in Capricorn. So you will have regained the strength of Mars, a strong Mars that begins the year in this kind of existential dread place and ends the year quite empowered in its exaltation in the house of its planetary joy. that's what I have for you, Leo risings. It's a year of a lot of change for you, but all in all, not a bad year, I don't think. Thanks for hanging in there. Please this video and share it with other Leo risings if you feel called to do so. It makes a huge difference for me and my work. Thanks so much for being here. Happy 2025.